Welcome to the Workplace Minute, powered by H3HR Advisors and sponsored by WorkHuman. Thanks for joining me for your quick update on what's important in the world of work. My name is Steve Boese. Today in the Workplace Minute, we're talking about one of the most enduring ideas in American politics and economics, the idea of bringing manufacturing jobs en masse back to the United States. Let's dive in. This is a promise we've heard from presidents of both parties for decades. The idea is understandable. Manufacturing once represented the backbone of the American middle class, providing stable, well-paying jobs that supported families and entire communities. When factories closed, many small towns struggled, and those losses are still felt today. But there's an important distinction that often gets lost in the conversations about bringing manufacturing back. The United States can probably bring some of it back. In fact, in some sectors, it's already coming back. But what is far less likely is bringing back the millions of manufacturing jobs that once came with it. The history of manufacturing employment in America is important for some context. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, manufacturing employment in the U.S. reached its all-time high in June of 1979. When nearly 19.6 million Americans worked in manufacturing. At the same time, total non-farm employment in the U.S. stood at just over 90 million workers. Both of those numbers are significant. So fast forward to today. As of June of 2026, total U.S. employment has grown dramatically to nearly 159 million workers. That's an increase of almost 69 million jobs. Yet manufacturing employment has fallen to about 12.6 million workers, nearly 7 million fewer than at its peak almost 50 years ago. So those two numbers capture one of the most important structural changes in the American economy. Over the past half century, the United States has created tens of millions of new jobs, yet manufacturing has steadily become a smaller share of the workforce. Manufacturing represented nearly 22% of all payroll jobs in 1979. Today, it accounts for less than 8%. So it's easy to assume that globalization alone explains this decline. Companies moving production overseas certainly have played an important role, especially beginning in the 1980s, and accelerating after China joined the World Trade Organization. Lower labor costs encourage companies to shift labor-intensive manufacturing overseas, while the United States increasingly specialized in higher value products in more advanced industries. But globalization is only part of this story. An even bigger reason manufacturing employs fewer people today is productivity. Modern factories simply require far fewer workers to produce the same amount of output. Industrial robots, advanced automation, computer-controlled machinery, artificial intelligence, better quality systems, predictive maintenance tech, and highly integrated software tools allow manufacturers to produce far more goods with dramatically fewer employees than factories required back in the 70s and 80s. Think about what a modern semiconductor fabrication facility, a pharmaceutical plant, or an advanced automotive factory looks like today. These facilities represent billions of dollars of investment, and they're filled with robotics, automation, sensors, AI, and highly specialized equipment. Yes, they're manufacturing plants, but they're nothing like the labor-intensive factories many people picture when they think about American manufacturing. That's why simply building more factories does not necessarily mean creating millions of new factory jobs. Now let's also discuss another strategy some think can generate an increase in U.S. manufacturing: tariffs. The stated goal behind the tariffs is straightforward. By making imported products more expensive, policymakers hope companies will manufacture more goods inside the United States and then create more American jobs. And some manufacturers have announced new investments, and certain industries have benefited from additional domestic production. But manufacturing employment has not experienced the kind of broad resurgence many expected. In fact, in the 18 or so months since the first set of sweeping tariffs were enacted, U.S. manufacturing employment has been down by about 100,000 jobs. And one reason is that it takes years to design a new factory, to get financing, to get permitting, and actually build it. Employment won't change overnight. A semiconductor plant can take the better part of a decade to go from a press release to a fully engaged workforce. And more importantly, the factories being built today are designed around the automation we've talked about. So a new billion-dollar manufacturing facility may produce enormous economic value while employing only maybe a few hundred permanent workers. The economics of modern manufacturing simply favors technology, automation, and capital investment over the large workforces of the past. And tariffs also create additional complexity. Many American manufacturers depend on globally sourced components and raw materials, so higher import costs can raise production expenses for companies that are already manufacturing things here in the United States, and that offsets some of the intended employment benefits. And because manufacturing investments are planned over many years, maybe even decades, companies often hesitate making massive commitments when trade policies and these tariffs can simply change with the whims of any new administration. So tariffs can do a few things. They can protect specific industries, they can raise targeted amounts of revenue, and they can hand the U.S. leverage, say, in trade negotiations, but what they have not done, at least not yet, is bring factory jobs roaring back. More than a year in, the scoreboard shows fewer factory jobs, higher input costs, and a policy that's been rewritten so many times, even trade lawyers need a scorecard. So maybe that pays off years from now, maybe it doesn't. But looking ahead to the next 10 or 20 years, I think we're probably asking the wrong questions about manufacturing in America. The question isn't whether manufacturing will return to America. In some ways it has in certain parts of the economy, and we are seeing some investments in semiconductors, aerospace, pharmaceuticals, and defense, energy, and other forms of advanced manufacturing. But the better question is what kind of manufacturing economy we want to build in America. And the answer is likely one that produces more output than ever before while employing relatively fewer people than previous generations would expect. Manufacturing has become so capital-intensive, software-driven, and AI-enabled. The workers who are hired are more likely to be robot technicians, automation engineers, industrial software specialists, precision machinists, data analysts, and highly skilled maintenance professionals rather than traditional factory or assembly line type workers. That doesn't mean manufacturing will disappear. Quite the opposite. Manufacturing will always be essential to our economic growth, to our innovation, certainly to national security and global competitiveness. But the reality is simply manufacturing has evolved. And perhaps that's the biggest takeaway from these numbers. The signal isn't that America is abandoning manufacturing. It's that manufacturing is increasingly creating output without creating proportional employment. The economy of 1979 isn't coming back because the technologies, business models, and competitive realities that define that era no longer exist. And the factories of the future will almost certainly be built here, probably even in greater numbers than people expect, and they will produce extraordinary amounts of value, they will support critical industries, and they will strengthen U.S. competitiveness, but they just won't look like the factories or employ the number of workers that Americans remember from nearly half a century ago. That will not happen. That's it for the show today. A big thank you to WorkHuman for supporting the Workplace Minute. Be sure to subscribe to the HR Happy Hour Network on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Steve Boese, and this has been the Workplace Minute from H3 HR Advisors.